Good evening to you. For Telesur, I'm Regan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. Here are this evening's headlines. Discussions between the Venezuelan and Colombian presidents over the shared border have been announced for Quito this coming Monday. Cuba reveals the heavy cost of the United States blockade on the island nation and once again calls for its removal. And refugees become desperate as Hungary closes the border. This and more now on From the South. Thank you for being here with us. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro will meet with Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos in Quito on Monday to discuss the border issue. The announcement was made by Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa. Maduro was originally unsure if Santos would accept his offer.
Only with a meeting with you, President, can the situation of the border be resolved with the mediation of CELAC and UNASUR. Foreign Minister Delcy Rodriguez told me that there will probably be a presidential meeting in Quito on Monday. I am ready, and hopefully the meeting will take place. But I have a sensation that President Santos doesn't want to meet, maybe due to the reason external to Colombia.
And President Santos was originally cautious of the idea. He said the conditions he had demanded were on the way to being resolved and that he was now prepared to agree to a meeting with President Maduro.
I repeat, I am ready to meet President Maduro so we can take decisions and find concrete ways to make the border open and free of crime. We are not going to meet just for the photo, to shake hands and let things go on in the same way. The humanitarian conditions are being met, and I again thank Ecuador and Uruguay for their support.
Las condiciones mínimas humanitarias se han venido cumpliendo.
Mexico has celebrated El Grito, the cry of independence. Viva, cried the revelers as many were decked out in the red, white and green, the colors of the Mexican flag. El Grito is a call and response led by Mexico's president to ring in Mexico's Independence Day on September 16th. The air-piercing tradition goes back 205 years to the call of revolutionary leader Miguel Hidalgo for Mexicans to revolt against Spanish colonial rule. However, the presidency has been accused of paying people to attend the event after a Twitter movement took off yesterday with thousands of users urging citizens not to attend any official event as a symbolic protest against the violence and the corruption prevailing in the country. Hondurans have taken advantage of independence celebrations to step up their campaign for the resignation of President Juan Orlando Hernandez. Gerardo Torres has more from Tegucigalpa.
As Central America commemorates its 194th anniversary of independence from Spain, protesters took to the streets in Honduras. They wanted to point out that independence is still something they are fighting for because of the continuing interference of the United States in their country's military, political, and economic decisions.
The government tries to sell us the idea that this is an independent country, but in fact we depend economically and politically on the foreign policy, especially of the United States. There are many examples, including the exploitation of our maritime resources, extensive mining, and so on. There is no independence, so we are trying to promote a new way of understanding this.
The government had its official parade with the participation of the military forces and members of the ruling National Party.
In the first place, I come here because I wanted to, not because they paid me, and here you can see the people that truly want independence for Honduras.
The leader of the resistance movement and former President Manuel Zelaya didn't take part in the protest for medical reasons.
Manuel Zelaya Rosales today had an operation for a fracture in his thigh bone, and he had to miss this protest, but he sent a message and asked me to read it to all the protesters. He is in an excellent condition. There is no danger. He just didn't want to postpone this operation any longer, and he soon will be back in the country.
As they have done for the last 4 months, the protesters demanded the resignation of President and punishment for those public officials who are accused of corruption. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
Egypt has called for a rapid and transparent investigation into the accidental killing of 8 Mexican tourists by security forces. This came as Mexico's Foreign Secretary Claudia Ruiz Massieu visited the country demanding answers. The incident on Sunday, in which the tourists in the Western Desert were hit by an airstrike after security forces mistook them for militants, has proven embarrassing to Egypt, which relies heavily on tourism revenues.
The Egyptian government has conveyed its deepest regret at the tragic incidents, and we have agreed to wait until the investigation is complete to know its findings.
Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez has said that his country will once again present a resolution before the UN calling for an end to the United States blockade. The foreign minister, from a press conference in Havana, said that the blockade imposed on Cuba by the United States has impacted the country's economy to the tune of $833.7 billion in 5 decades. The figure differs to a UN estimate of US $117 billion between 1960 and 2014.
Memorable, para que sea una visita como la ha cuantificado por sus.
And President Barack Obama has once again urged the U.S. Congress to take steps towards lifting what he calls the embargo against Cuba.
My biggest suggestion would be for the BRT just to start having a conversation on a bipartisan basis about lifting the embargo.
Activists from the United States as well as Canada and Latin America hold a day of action against the blockade in Washington. The actions will run until the end of the week. They are demanding that the United States Congress unconditionally lift the unilateral measure. They're also calling for the closure of Guantanamo Bay and the lifting of flight restrictions between the U.S. and Cuba.
A strategy meeting on what points would be best to address with different members of Congress led the way for the beginning of the campaign, Days of Action Against the Blockade, which hopes to influence Congress members to put an end to the blockade on Cuba.
Cuba is a regular place that wants to live its life and wants to determine its way of being without foreign intervention. Those are the experiences which we want to speak to the Congress members about.
I don't know why in politics change is such a bad idea.
Massachusetts Representative James McGovern joined the members of these organizations and expressed his agreement with the need to end a blockade that has negatively impacted the island for over 50 years, costing it over $800 billion.
I think after 50 years of a failed policy, it's time for us to pursue a more grown-up, mature approach to one another. I give the president credit for what he's done. Now Congress needs to do what it should do, and that is lift the embargo and lift the travel restrictions.
Organizers of the event are hopeful that the general consensus by U.S. citizens to put an end to the blockade will help persuade Congress.
The tide is changing around Cuba, and I think that there's a lot of support to really change what has been ineffective foreign policy in relation to Cuba. So I think that we're all hopeful that Congress is ready to make the right choice.
And this year, Congress should
Though President Barack Obama has expressed a need to end the blockade, there are many subjects that need to be discussed before a true normalization of relations. Among these, the use of U.S. funds to finance political opposition projects in Cuba that would lead to a change in government. Bianca Perez, Telesur, Washington, D.C.
And the Cuban government has also called on the European Union to take effective measures to alleviate the refugee crisis.
Y nos preocupa profundamente que la Unión Europea no avance en relación con.
It worries us deeply that the European Union has not advanced in relation to the deep causes that have caused these migration waves, or the use of repressive military means against migrants. We were all appalled at the images of the little boy on the beach, as a symbol that touched all of mankind. Hopefully there is political will in the governments of industrialized countries that are historically responsible for the conditions of underdevelopment and poverty.
As Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa announces hosting talks between Colombia and Venezuela, currently in the capital Ecuador in Quito, Ecuador, right-wing and indigenous groups are protesting, calling on the resignation of the president. Our correspondent Liz Schufius is there and joins us on the line. Liz, can you hear us?
Hello, Reagan. Yes, I can hear you perfectly. We are here at the opposition march, which has just arrived to Quito's Santo Domingo Plaza.
Can you tell us what's happening there? What's the mood on the ground?
Yes, Reagan. Well, we are here in Santo Domingo Plaza in the historic sector of the city. This is just a few blocks away from the Carondelet Presidential Palace, where the permanent vigil for democracy is currently happening with supporters of the government. Here at the opposition march, the mood is angry, I would say, and the march is comprised of Ecuador's main opposition groups, which includes the FUT, CEDOCUT, and a fraction of the indigenous movement, as you said, which is represented under CONAI and ECORUNARI, and there are other groups here present as well. Now, an interesting point is that Ecuador's richest man and former presidential candidate, who actually lost the president of our court by a significant margin, Alvaro Noboa, released a statement comparing political parties and organizations like Creo, Suma, Madera de Quevedo, among others, to join this march. And we did, in fact, see some people represented by these parties and organizations here while we were marching. But despite this, this was not the opposition's largest turnout. Police officers on the scene told us that the Ministry of the Interior estimates that there are about 2,000 people here marching. And they seem to have reached Santo Domingo Plaza without any major incidents registered. And it is expected now that they will march back to El Arbolito Park and Ecuador's Institute of Social Security here shortly. Here again.
Liz, it sounds like these are extensions of the protests that are happening for the past few months. If so, what are can you refresh us on the protesters' specific demands?
Well, the opposition finds themselves currently divided in Ecuador, Reagan. So their demands are varied. Many people we spoke with here want the constitutional reforms, which are set to go through the National Assembly this December, permanently discarded. Specifically, the reform that would allow for the indefinite re-election of any elected official, which many people in the opposition do not agree with because they are against the possibility that President Correa could possibly be re-elected in 2017 if he decides to be a candidate, which he has not announced, although he still enjoys a majority approval rating in the country. Additionally, people here are against the temporarily suspended inheritance tax bill and law for capital gains, which the government could only affect 2% of the population. But marchers here say that they want these bills permanently discarded. Many marchers here are also against the state measure, which puts an incremental tax on selected import goods up to 45%. This measure seeks to create a space for Ecuadorian products on the national market. And well, today, prior to the march, there was a production fair here in Quito's historic sector featuring products of Ecuadorian artisans. And people there told us that with the safeguards, they now feel more competitive on the national market. These are what the principal demands of the march seem to be. For groups like CONAI, they say that they're against the water law and want greater control over intercultural bilingual education. And while the opposition has refused to enter the National Dialogue for Equality and Social Justice, called for by the government following the beginning of these marches, but some of them have turned violent this past June.
Thanks so much, Liz, for the great reporting. Hopefully we'll touch base with you another time. Thanks so much and keep safe. Continuing now, still in Ecuador, President Correa has said that international media attacks on his country have increased in recent months, especially with European media's misreading of the situation in Ecuador after indigenous groups aligned with right-wing sectors to call for his resignation.
We do have media attacks, obviously the usual national media, but also international media. which I had not seen before. I insist it may be a combination of factors: enmity towards the government, hostility against the government, and also the totally wrong mystification, especially in some Europe media, that if there is an indigenous protest, they are all right and all honest. And that's not true. Let's not fool ourselves.
The forum between the community of Latin American and Caribbean states and China began today at the UNASUR headquarters in Quito. Ministers and high-level functionaries of the 33 CELAC countries and China participated. The forum looks to increase cooperation between the CELAC countries and China, with science and technology being of particular interest. The first day of discussions revolved around the Latin American region's necessity for Chinese funding, while China needs the natural resources and energy of Latin America. In Colombia, indigenous leader Feliciano Valencia from the war-torn state of Cauca has been captured and sentenced to 16 years in prison. The move has triggered widespread outrage among Colombia's indigenous communities and organizations. Here is Natalia Margarita again with more on this story.
After being already acquitted on charges of kidnapping, renowned indigenous leader Feliciano Valencia is facing once again a jail sentence upon the same charges. His detention has been widely labeled as an attack against indigenous peoples.
This is another example of this country's political persecution against the social and popular movements, but mainly and foremost against the leaders behind the mass mobilization processes that are taking place lately. This is unfortunate news that comes right in the moment of peace construction, when they are attempting to silence and muzzle the social and political struggles.
The kidnapping charges Feliciano is facing relate to a 2008 incident when an indigenous member of the military, attempting to infiltrate a social protest, was detained and prosecuted under the indigenous jurisdiction, a special jurisdiction that has been explicitly recognized in Colombia's political constitution since 1991.
This case is the reflection of many things. Among those, the reflection of a political persecution, a historical discrimination and scorn for the indigenous, but it also has to do with an economic scenario. That is the economic model that still prevails in this country.
For the indigenous leaders, this is part of a very well-planned strategy that includes a stigmatization in national media outlets, and which is aimed to restrain the rights they have been historically struggling for, and a struggle of which Feliciano has been a well-known face.
To accuse Feliciano of kidnapping and other forms of stigmatization, he is a victim. It is to criminalize our traditions and ways that are recognized as part of indigenous special jurisdiction and our own special law system. They are simply ignoring the advances that Colombia's political constitution has had in regard to indigenous communities.
As the indigenous are not willing to give up the rights they have gained, they have declared themselves on high alert and are deciding the steps to be taken next. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
And this just in, there was an 8.4 earthquake off the coast of Chile just over an hour ago. The earthquake occurred on the central coast, about 200 kilometers north of the capital, Santiago. The quake was felt as far away as Buenos Aires and shook the entire of Chile. The country is currently on tsunami alert, as is Hawaii and Peru. We will bring you more when we know more as well. And coming up after the break, as the Greek elections loom nearer, breakaway leftist group, the Popular Unity Party, as well as the far right, gained some ground. This and more next.
Caracas, Havana, Mexico, Quito, Washington, wherever the newsmakers will be there. Watch on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there. Rod Stars, G1, and Claudia de la Cruz are Rebel Diaz, hip-hop activists positioned within a history of political resistance through music. And you don't stop. They invite young people to express themselves about their social struggles. And you don't stop. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
The truth behind the power. We lift the lid on some of the world's most ruthless figures. Open file. Only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
It's not confirmed how it all began, but it was a chaotic scene at the Rosco-Orgos border between Hungary and Serbia as a tense standoff played out. According to Hungarian police, refugees stuck on Serbia's side of the border tried to break through a gate, injuring 20 police officers in the process. In retaliation, officers used tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowd. To many, a clash was brewing between the refugees and Hungarian authorities, who refused to allow any more refugees through its borders. Human rights groups have labeled Hungary's treatment of refugees as brutal and inhumane. And UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is reiterating his message that refugees must be treated with dignity. Speaking at the United Nations briefing room in New York, Ban said that those risking their lives to escape war and persecution must be given some priority.
Men, women, and children fleeing war and persecution deserve real support, including asylum. I ask those standing in the way of the rights of refugees to stand in their shoes. People facing barrel bombs, brutality in their country will continue to seek life in another. People with a few prospects at home will continue to seek opportunity elsewhere. This is nature. It is what any of us would do for ourselves and for our children.
The clashes were set off by Hungary, which announced the closure of its border with Serbia and introduced fines or jail time for those caught trying to enter illegally. For more now, we turn to Hazem Abdullah in Syria.
The Hungarian authorities deployed both the army and the police along their new border fence. Thousands of refugees with only tents for shelter still hope they may be able to travel through Hungary towards other countries.
The fact is that the EU is following the US vision, which is to prepare a new political path in the Middle East. These refugees are being used by the West as a tool to exert pressure and get the results they want.
These new measures came after a sharp dispute within the European Union over how to distribute immigrants and quotas among member states. But angry immigrants have been climbing over the border wire fence, demanding that the Hungarian authorities allow them to pass.
It has become clear that there are Arab countries supporting terrorism at the expense of those seeking safety, and at the same time they do not provide anything for the refugees. It is necessary to end this crisis, specifically the war on terrorism. The problem is not just that Europe no longer wants to take the refugees.
Mr. President, thank you.
Speaking to the Russian media, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said that terrorism is the main reason that drive people to flee in search of safety and a secure life. He added that if the West is really worried about the refugees, it should stop supporting terrorists.
President. So as long as they follow this propaganda, they will have more refugees. So it's not about Europe didn't accept them or inbred them as refugees. It's about not dealing with the cause. Stop, if you are worried about them, stop supporting terrorists. That's what we think regarding the crisis. This is the core of the whole issue of refugees.
Most Arab countries are keeping a distance from this crisis, while many refugees blame them for supporting the terrorists and for not receiving any of these fleeing from extremism which they created. Hazem Abdullah, Tele-Sur, Syria.
Moving to Gaza now, Venezuelan scholarship students have protested the postponement of their travel. More on the story now with Noor Harazin.
The second batch of the Palestinian students who were chosen for the Venezuelan Education Scholarship organized a sit-in in front of the headquarters of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Gaza City Wednesday morning. The students protested the repeated and unjustified measures by divided Palestinian authorities, which cause a routine postponement for their travel to begin education in Venezuela. Banners reading, "We missed 1 year and still waiting," "Open the borders," and "Our suitcases are ready," reflect their disappointment.
الهدف من هذه الفعالية
The aim behind this event is to deliver a message to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and all the related parties that we are waiting for a date for our trip to begin education in Venezuela. We have been waiting for months for no reason. We meet all the criteria required for the scholarship. Our trip has been several times for no reason. We're here today to demand them to fix a date for our departure to start social medicine education in Venezuela.
A few months back, the president of the Venezuelan Republic, Nicolas Maduro, announced the Yasser Arafat Scholarship Program that welcomed 1,000 Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jerusalem to begin education at the medical school in Caracas. In November 2014, 119 Palestinian students arrived in the country in the framework of a plan that has been going on since the Israeli offensive protective edge on the Gaza Strip as a gesture of solidarity with the Palestinian people. Noor Harazin, Telesul TV, Gaza.
And now for another look at some of the stories making news around the world.
A truck bomb targeting Afghan district office in the province of Kabul killed at least 4 people and wounded 41 others. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. Bombings have increased in the area since the government and Taliban both confirmed in July that the leader of the Taliban had died 2 years ago. The UN mission in Afghanistan has called for an immediate end to these attacks in civilian populated areas. According to the United Nations, Sri Lanka needs international help to probe war crimes committed there during its civil conflict. These crimes included the disappearance of tens of thousands of people. 38 protesters were detained and 10 left injured after clashes erupted in Beirut, Lebanon. This after protesters from the You Stink movement as well as political reform activists all clashed with security forces. The You Stink campaign was launched after Environmental Ministry closed a landfill site on July 17th without providing an alternative for Beirut and its suburbs. And about 1,200 taxis from across Europe deliberately created a traffic jam in central Brussels to protest against the American international transportation network company Uber. They are accusing the company of completely and unfairly circumventing local laws. Since its launch in Europe 4 years ago, Uber has faced court injunctions in several countries, including Spain, France and Germany.
To believers, he was an inspirational healer, often referred to as the Pope of Voodoo. But to skeptics, he was simply a controversial voodoo priest. Either way, the man at the helm of Haiti's voodoo faith has passed away at the age of 79. Many believers attended his funeral, as well as Haiti's president, Michel Martelly. During the service, a representative of the Catholic Church spoke to the audience of the importance of all Haitians, whatever the religious affiliation, all working for the good of the country, without stigmatization or discrimination. Former New Zealand rugby union player Jonah Lomu joined a group of some 70 people for an ancient Maori war dance called the Haka. The event was a surprise performance in central London. Lomu told the onlookers that it's always an honor to perform the Haka, whether he's representing his country in front of 80,000 people or performing for a group of unsuspecting rugby fans. He also commented on the upcoming Rugby World Cup, which begins on Friday, saying that he believes it's possible that New Zealand become the first team to win back-to-back titles. And finally this evening, a white lion is now on display in a zoo for the first time in Brazil. The female cub is now just under 60 pounds heavy and close to 3 feet long. She's been given the name Clara, which is the Portuguese word for light. Clara's keepers at the zoo have likened the significant care she required when she was born to that needed by a newborn human. And they say she is growing up fast. We've got more on these and other stories. Please visit our website, telesurtv.net/English. From our news teams here in Quito, Ecuador, and in Caracas, Venezuela, I'm Regan Devines for Telesur English. Have a great evening. We hope to see you tomorrow.